So I think all of you have to say you're okay with being
Yeah.
recorded for this. We did have our recording from the last meeting on our website, which is now posted on YouTube, so it's a lot faster to get to. And we will be doing the same thing for this one now with our good friends at Falmouth TV. They've been helping us with some of those issues in the background. So with that, with where we're at presently, let's go ahead and just sort of pick up where we left off. And I think that the topic likely was flexibility on parking. If that's so fine, or does anybody want to sort of recap anything or have any questions from the last time around? Or do you want to just launch into flexibility on parking? I'm going to go with launch in on flexibility. Yes, Jim.
Well, I think it's really important to take a look at the way our zoning has done for our B2 zones, and you look at the Falmouth Plaza and the giant sea of parking that our zoning requires, and realize we have been doing the wrong thing, and use that as a premise of how we're going to go forward. And the only other thing I'd make sure everyone to consider, if a young person's, I understand the Cape Cod Commission, this is a number I've heard from the Cape Cod Commission, that a car costs $8,000 a year to maintain, insurance, all that stuff, compared to renting a place. You can't do everything, and so that's why we need flexibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, I heard a great story on the NPR today about the issue with office space in buildings and converting the Tribune building in Chicago to residence from office space, and the fact that one of the hindrances of doing this in urban areas and trying to bring vitality to downtown areas is, believe it or not, the local zoning code that says you got to have two parking spaces for every unit. And they just don't have that in downtown Chicago at the Tribune building particularly. So it is one of those things that I think we're all pretty cognizant of the fact that we're not looking at a full boat of vehicles for our potential development here.
The city of Boston just passed something that actually, instead of having parking minimums, says parking maximums.
Yeah,
And
it's been a lot in the hot real estate market, that's for sure.
And at the same time, I think we have to be very aware. There, as good as the bit of transit that we have is, it's very hard to live here and not have access to a vehicle, so we can't ignore that.
Nope. And I certainly hope that we'll look at incorporating some of the sort of broad concepts that we talked about with the mixed-use residential commercial overlay district, by offering sort of incentives to reduce parking below 1-for-1 with some sort of car share program to give people an opportunity to get someplace else without having to own a car. So with that, let me just turn it back over to Nate and to Jeff and Erica about picking up where we're at in our discussion about flexibility on parking.
Thanks, Tom. As you're saying this, I'm sort of remembering back to sort of exactly where I think we left off, where I think I made a closing statement about, our job. I'm hoping that this group will embrace, that our job is to sort of advocate strongly for a different way of doing things, because we have a lot of people who are going to look at this, and a lot of folks who may doubt the efficacy of this. And I think this group wants to start off strong with as much flexibility as we think we can. Just from our perspective on the parking issue, I think as we do start to talk with other folks about it, one of the things we'll bring forward is just, a lot of examples of really wonderful places that everybody's familiar with. And all of these walkable, mixed use, really attractive, kind of quintessential village style developments that you see all over New England that everybody loves to visit. A lot of the buildings or a significant portion of the buildings don't have any parking. And that's because design came first. And it was much more about situating the building and scaling the building to create, an experience that was consistent with the street, what we were trying to achieve for the street, not just utility for the lot. And I think we mentioned that when Jeff and I started to put pen to paper on some early zoning standards, and then Jeremy and Erica and Joel started trying to, do some conceptual plans, even some significantly reduced parking standards on some of those smaller lots really held them back in terms of, what they could provide in terms of massing and development. And that's when we started looking at, those areas for shared opportunities. And it really makes a lot of sense to us. And we've seen success, where you let the property owners and the underwriters are going to keep them in check on this, let them present the solution to you. Don't prescribe that you need X amount on site. Let them come to you and say, this is how we think that we can, address this parking issue. These are the opportunities that our site presents. And sometimes that site may have a great opportunity for parking, and sometimes it won't. And just kind of let them figure it out. We were recently working in, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the town of Shrewsbury, but in terms of like the way their town center, their historic town center operates, it's really, the scale is very similar to what you see in Falmouth. And they've been trying to crack this code for a long time. They've got all kinds of parking availability, but there's a bunch of lots that don't have any, and some lots that have too much. And basically, when the new zoning that they've adopted basically says you tell us how you're going to do this, and these are the criteria that we're going to use to judge your application. Pardon the sirens if you can hear those. My house is not on fire. That'll go quickly. Okay. Give us an application. Here's the information we want. Here are the criteria that you have to meet. Tell us how you're going to solve this issue and move forward that way. So kind of putting it in the hands of the developer, letting the developer be innovative and resourceful, look at other parcels, look at what's available on street, look at what's available within a certain radius, and present the solution that's going to be best for the district.
That is certainly cutting edge stuff, I would venture to say, in Massachusetts. And we don't even have the lieutenant governor's hometown to model from Shrewsbury.
Well, there was a suggestion brought up last time that I don't like, and that is for the town to create one of those lots, I think it's near Rose Street, into a large surface parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
That goes really against what we're trying to do. We were going to have to provide parking that would be out of this main area of development, I would rather see the town expend on a parking garage that looks attractive,
Mm-hmm.
multi-storied.
Yep. Yeah, and I think any centralized resource is going to help you. I mean, one of the things that we're mindful of with parking, parking garages or facilities, whatever you want to call them, those cost about $40,000 a space. Yeah. to develop, and that can be a tall order for anybody. And so you could start with a surface lot and then go from there. But I do recognize that a lot of folks don't, they find surface lots unattractive. But if you break them up, and design them right, they can be a super valuable resource. You see, communities like, Hyannis or Newport or Walpole, Mass has a beautiful historic downtown. And they all have, sort of a centralized surface lot that you can't see from the street. It's hidden. The main street is still beautiful, but people are parking in that lot behind all the buildings and then walking out into the main street area. But the overarching sentiment is that, the town should be thinking about innovative ways to try to provide a centralized opportunity or a series of smaller opportunities around the district.
Well, when we went out there and walked, one of the things, at least that seemed clear to me, is that there's actually a ton of pavement out there. It's just used for the wrong thing. And if we could make that part of Main Street like the part of Main Street that we like downtown, we'd have a lot of parking that would cost a lot less than $40,000 a space. And the one other thing that really struck me was Jim's comment that there's basically a 20% difference in rent between the two locations, downtown and there. And I would argue that you could make a case to say that on-street parking is the biggest reason why that's the case. And that the town would get and the owner would get 20% more value if we gave them that asset. I don't know how to do that necessarily, but pretty powerful argument.
I got a comment on that. When we were walking, and I've also really paying attention to what's going on with the, between Staples and Cappy's, they actually have a drive lane that's adjacent to the street.
Yep.
And if for some reason we could give them greater density and greater things and incorporate that, either not take it or an easement or some way to have a giant boulevard with on-street parking on the street and bicycle paths and way to do it, with houses or buildings with stores like 4,000 square foot footprints with 2 and 3 stories of tenants right above it, it'd be a marvelous place to live. No one wants to walk through a giant parking lot with cars zooming at you. No, people don't walk through parking lots. They get in their car. You need to be armor protected. So I think we can do this. It's going to be hard, but there's a way to do it.
And I think from our perspective, we're just hoping to leave this conversation with sort of the green light to present something for you to react to. We have a wide variety of tools to think about, and from a zoning perspective, and we can talk with you about other ways that the town can get more involved, because there's some of the stuff that you're starting to talk about here is the management side of it. So there's kind of three big pieces to parking. There's the amount, there's the volume of parking, there's the design of the parking, and those two aspects get covered in zoning. But management is another big piece of it. So sort of managing your inventory, allowing parking to become a commodity, allowing there to be a market for parking and leasing and sharing, and then having spaces that may have some time restrictions on them and what that looks like. That's a whole other discussion, but an important one for you to think about.
Well, Nate, you said you want to have enough information coming out of this meeting tonight to be able to start presenting plans to us for our reaction. Where do you feel there is a deficit that you need to have those holes filled in by tonight's meeting? Because we did give a lot of definition at the last meeting, I think.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. I think we're ready to sort of draw something up for you to react to. But I know, this is where we've started our discussion tonight, so I just want to make sure if there's any other hesitation.
As Tom mentioned at the beginning, we didn't really get a chance to finish the conversation around parking, which we wanted to do today. We did not get a chance to talk about design. So those are really the two gaps. that we wanted to cover today, and then we can start putting pen to paper.
Jim?
Jim, you just speak up.
Okay, my only concern is we don't have a member of the zoning or the selectmen
Select board.
here. And they have ultimate control. And if we don't get them buying in, we're wasting our time. When we've seen what happens on other projects, when they disagree with us, it's hard. I was hoping we'd have someone here.
Well,
And we did have someone at the last meeting, yes?
yeah, Megan was here at the
Yes.
last meeting. She has a parent-teacher gig tonight, part of life. I didn't, like I said, I didn't hear from Anji. So I know she was taking a class, I think she told me on Wednesdays, which is one of the reasons we wanted to make sure we had the second meeting on Thursday to make it easy for her. But we got what we got, and we'll keep pushing the ball towards them. And we'll certainly, this certainly won't be our last meeting with the working group and them.
And the nice thing is Megan seemed to be an advocate. She was, very much in support of all the items that we sort of reached consensus on at the last meeting, which I think is encouraging. So you've got an advocate among the select people. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, in an earlier meeting, I don't think it was with us, but or maybe it was when Megan talked about places she has lived in town. She lived in an apartment over top of Eastman's Hardware and lots of other places. So she's got, she's covered a lot of turf in her young life in Falmouth based on, her experiences and living places and things like that.
That's a really good example, Tom. Eastman's Hardware is on a half acre with 10 units.
Yep. It's a great example. But she says living over top of a hardware store isn't as glamorous as you might think, Jim.
It's not glamorous. Living in a condo with somebody above you is not glamorous, but it's a place to live.
Yeah. And when you walk outside, you're in a great place. You're
Absolutely.
downtown friggin' Falmouth. Did I say friggin' on the recording? I'm sorry.
I guess one thing I wanted to ask actually at the beginning that I forgot to, Jim, you mentioned the walking tour that you've done, maybe it was Tony. Were there any other things that came out of that walking tour that you wanted us to be aware of? Anything that you saw that looked like an opportunity or an issue to address?
Jim?
I think the connection to Worcester Court and going down to Falmouth Heights Beach. And when you get a little bit further away, Worcester Court becomes a promenade with streets on both sides and walking. And it's such a valuable, people love it. Somehow to connect that all the way into this district so people feel comfortable, riding their bikes or walking down into the beach, or the other way, it takes you out to the lights and out of town. It takes you to the hospital west to Falmouth Heights Beach. It's a really major artery. It's a back artery, but it's the biggest one. And it also is a residentially area. And I think that people, I'm developing a site off the street. You should see we're selling properties on Alma Road on Worcester Court thing. It's amazing.
So what I'm understanding that you just said, Jim, is that we don't necessarily want this to appear when you're in it as if it's almost a gated sort of area, that there need to be wide open invitations to expand your walking to other spots.
I think someplace between Davis Straits and Worcester Court, there might have to be another connection cut through to link up to Worcester Court. So it's not such a far stretch, and it makes it a much more walkable. This is a neighborhood where people could walk to the Island Queen. They could walk downtown. They could walk to the beach. They could get on public transportation. And what we've done in our zoning, we built these great big buildings that just isolate. We built a wall. And I think we need to break down the wall and split it up a little bit. And that's the only guidance. as far as designing, I'd leave it up to the experts, but I would like to see Worcester Court and a prominent, and a walking to the beach be a huge functional part. And maybe the backs, instead of the backsides of these stores, just have loading docks and trucks. They could also be retail with apartments above and make it somebody would really want to walk down the street and not get run over by a giant truck. And maybe we should not have giant trucks with 10,000 or 20,000 square foot retail spaces, but 4,000 square foot retail spaces where they bring in smaller trucks. Just focusing on walking and people more than parking than anything else.
I agree with you.
I still think it's a far cry to walk on Route 28 today with the speed of cars and the way that feels compared to what it feels like to walk in the protected part of Main Street. I know I'm harping on the same.
No, but I agree with you, but if you could walk, if there was a street that went right through the middle of it, you could walk on the Worcester Court and have a promenade to the beach. That's where you would walk. That's only a couple 100 yards away.
Yeah, and one of those basic tenets we see in street design all the time is the on-street parking with that basically creates that buffer for the sidewalk. And as I think we talked about either here or on our walk, in some areas they're actually put the bicycle lane on the inside of the parking. So you got center line, travel lane, parking, bike lane, sidewalk. To create that sort of that buffer from all those folks driving down 28.
If we want people to walk, we got to make it comfy, and it's not right now.
And I guarantee you, you would never find anybody that was eating at the 99 restaurant and want to walk all the way across and go to one of the stores on the Davis Straits development, because you got to walk through a 200-yard parking lot that's nothing but pavement. It doesn't look safe. No one wants to walk there.
Any other observations from that walking tour?
Maybe I'll add one more, which is just it. And it's counter to what I'm sure we'll hear from all the traffic engineers from the state. They want to see all the cars get through. And they do eventually get through because they get through downtown. But the speed is part of what makes the walking uncomfortable.
Tony, I have an additional comment, I think, on that, because driving down Main Street, I have a fairly small car. It's an Elantra. But I drive down Main Street and it's dangerous because people just open their car doors right in front of you, step out of their cars, and most of the cars that are parked along there are very large SUVs or trucks. They take up the full width of that parking slot, if you will, against the curb. Mm-hmm. And there's just, it's too unsafe is my comment here.
Well, I do a presentation every year at Pine Hills, and that very same complaint gets made every year. And I actually really enjoyed it last year because instead of me answering the question, one of the residents did, so we'll have a little fun and go through it. But what the resident said is, he won't widen the street because it will just make people go faster. And that's really the whole drive, is that you want people to go slower so that it is uncomfortable to a certain degree, but it takes that to actually make people go slower. And that if there is an accident, at least there's less chance that it's going to be one where someone really gets hurt. And ironically, because it's tight, it ends up, when you do the statistics, it usually comes out that there are fewer, not more.
Yeah, I think the number that I seem to recall is at about 25 miles an hour, a car and a pedestrian, there's an 80% chance you're going to live. At 30 miles an hour, there's an 80% chance you're not going to live. Something to that effect.
Yeah, things really, I had this experience with a friend of mine. We were driving and we're sort of winnowing our way through the street. There were cars parked and it was a little tight. And he made the same complaints, like, God, he's just, this is so inconvenient. And I just looked over because he was driving and he was driving 18 miles an hour. And so I let him get through and I explained to him, there's been 6 studies done that I know of that look at the severity of accidents and speed. And you were driving under 20 miles an hour, just a few more miles an hour more, and the statistics change. They flip. And that area that we just drove through was designed to make you drive less than 20 miles an hour, and it worked. And you got a little annoyed, but it worked.
And Pat, the irony is most drivers don't have the same goal that you have. You want it to be safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas what I think most other people do when the road gets a little bit wider is they end up making it less safe.
Well, the reason for my comment, Tony, is that it's not so bad now, but during the summer,
Yeah.
there was a guy who got out of his car, left his door open and had his camera and stood in the lane.
Yeah.
Nobody could go by. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I always look in my rearview mirror to see if anybody's coming up.
Yeah.
Can't tell you how many times somebody's just opened their door right in front of me and stepped out of the car. And
It's true. It is a little more difficult, but the consequence of choosing the wider is that you end up making it so that the other things happen. And I'm not sure that's a good balance
no, I fully
for me to make.
I say, thank God I've got good brakes.
Yeah.
I think we need to design for people, not cars.
That'd be my vote in thinking about it. And if we could slow the road down and use that shoulder for parking, I think we would have done more than almost anything else we could do to change the character of what people build there.
You're right, we would, Tony. I would invite more like the feeling of Main Street.
And Jed has done some research for us, and it is possible to get on-street parking on a state road. Not to say that it's a shoo-in, but it's a possibility. And so something that the town will advocate for, and we will see how that goes.
I think there are some property value arguments that you could add based on the data that Jim has.
Absolutely.
And what was your delta on the rates again, Jim, between the 2 spaces?
Well, basically,
Ballpark, I mean.
20 rents high teens to low 30s. The difference between downtown Main Street, where my office is right now, or all the properties I have listings. I have a listing there. The mall is asking $17 a square foot for the space next to Planet Fitness. It's been in the market for a year. Anything downtown is getting scooped up. People are fighting for it, because where you can develop foot traffic and walking, people buy. If they, if they can, they don't even see the stores that are the mall. They're so far back from the street. So
talk a little bit about the Lily Pulitzer story, Jim.
Let's see. Which one? I'm trying to think. Lily Pulitzer. What did I tell you?
How they
What
have
story
the
did I
minimum.
tell you
They have the
that?
minimum about how many people have to be able to walk by before they'll lease a space.
Oh, no, it wasn't just Lily Pulitzer. What I was really talking about is a really good example of people that have studied foot traffic. And if I want every one of you, the next time you go to Chatham or Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and look around, and you will see 2 stores that seem to pop up everywhere. It was Sea Bags and Fat Face. And I tried to land both these tenants in my building at 291 Main Street, which is across from the library, on a one-sided retail, which has half the foot traffic that a I couldn't get them to do that. But every town that I go to right now, they have done some kind of market research with Google Analytics that talks about cell phones and traffic, and they've identified where the foot traffic is, and they're leasing up those spaces. And I'm sure that if we would tap into that kind of analytics and looking not just car traffic, but foot traffic and people and cell phone things, if you go to Martha's, next time you're not in Falmouth, you're in a high rent district, look around. I guarantee you, you'll see both Fat Face and Sea Bags. And those folks have some kind of market research. They've zeroed in on where the people are. And when I tried to rent them, they knew exactly, no, I don't want to be at 291 Main Street. I got to be between, they had an address zone and they weren't even from Falmouth. They already knew the math. And it's there. And I believe maybe we should try to tap into Google Analytics and looking at something like that instead of just traffic like we usually do in cars. But next time you're in one of those towns, all of a sudden you're thinking a high rent district, look around, and I guarantee you'll see both those tenants, because I've really noticed.
And is there anything else you wanted to cover related to parking? I guess one issue that we never addressed explicitly was, are you comfortable if we present something that requires zero parking in certain circumstances?
P1 zoning in Falmouth requires zero parking. It's the best, highest retail space we have.
Because
I-
more than
I'm
likely,
with
we're
you.
going to include that
Yeah.
to some extent.
I mean, I think the zero parking is predicated on the fact that there is some public parking, whether it's in the street or however it's done, but yes.
Right.
And public
I agree,
transportation.
Tony. I agree with that because we are a car-centric society. So we have to, even if we want to cut the number of spaces, I think we do still have to provide for some parking.
Because you still got to get a vote from town meeting for what we're going to do. And if people go, what?
Yeah.
No parking?
I can't drive and park right there.
Well, the fact that, we can kind of educate people that you can take a nice walk.
Yeah.
If there's someplace nice to walk, and there's lots of studies about that.
Yeah.
But to create, zoning and try to get people to say, yeah, you should vote for this thing with, I'm making up a number, 500 new units, 0 new parking spaces. That's probably problematic.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we also have to be cognizant of is that we are an aging community. And I do have problems with my knee joints. It hasn't prohibited me from walking as much as I would like, but there are some people who do have problems as they age with both knees and hips, and they cannot get around. So to ask them to not have parking and to be able to walk in here, we're going to have to think about that mix too, because what is our proportion of 60 or 65 and older, Tom? Do you know in this town?
45 or 50, it's high.
I don't know, but
I know.
I don't know, but I see a lot on the screen right now. No offense to the locals. But
But that we have to take into account that as we are getting older, and remember, this isn't going to come to bear fruit for a few years. We're all getting older even, and it could be, we really do have to provide in some manner for people to get around, because that was one of the arguments when we were thinking about not allowing parking on one side of Main Street and taking advantage of that in some way. The merchants, I think probably without one accepting it, said absolutely not, because they need to have that access for all kinds of people, and particularly elderly people who would have difficulty getting to their stores if they didn't have that.
Never mind the willing suspension of disbelief that you're actually going to get a space.
Well, that true.
There was one other thing that happened on our walk that I forgot about, Jim, but what Pat just said reminded me, which was, you mentioned the idea in the parcel that was taken out on south side of Main Street at the bend, and how that you thought there was a pipe that went through there, and was that a good place for a park?
Yes, the Cape Cod Commission has identified not only a park, but a waterway, if you look at the greenway going right through that and recovering there. I don't have, it's anecdotal evidence, okay? I can't prove it. But there's also, I know of anecdotal evidence downtown where there's a pipe that goes to across Main Street that actually herring run through it. So they buried a lot of stuff a long time ago, and there's all kinds of drainage, but that's also very low. It's in the floodplain, and the flood numbers, the elevation numbers are 5 or less in a 15 or in a 12-foot floodplain. So it's 6 or 7 feet underwater.
Yeah.
And it goes all, and basically is the connection to Falmouth Harbor. And there's history that shows we've had major hurricanes, and the boats of Falmouth Harbor end up in the rotary or that intersection there. It's happened. So, but the Cape Cod Commission in their Davis Straits shows a greenway connecting this area all the way to the harbor, and that's something we need to take in consideration. But there's $1 billion worth of real estate that's developed in between. So I mean, practicality of it's tough.
Our opportunity is at the next hurricane that wipes them out, probably.
Well, that might be, but it raised the issue of whether or not we should actually be including that or not. I think everybody was very comfortable that Alma Road was excluded.
Right.
And appropriately so. But we should, maybe that's worth chatting about for a minute too, if that's within the scope of what you guys want to accomplish, or is that for another time?
I think the planning board, Tony, really liked that concept, but we also recognize the improbability of it happening. First of all, it goes right by the motel down there that was recently purchased and renovated. As Jim said, so much property value is there, but it would be really, really nice if that could happen somewhere into the future.
I mean, I have a vision of people coming into Falmouth and driving down Davis Straits and connecting to Main Street and actually seeing a little view of the harbor as they go around, because it's so low, and it should, and the Cape Cod Commission in their Davis Straits plans actually show that. So that's pretty cool. And remember, Pat, when we first saw this was always a 50-year plan. And then we decided to hell with a 50-year plan. Let's kick it into gear now.
Right.
So we've taken the 50-year and we're trying to do it right away. And that's when this idea first came up. It was, oh, they'll do it sometime in the future. But if you don't start planning for it now, it'll never happen.
Well, we said that too with the local comprehensive plan when we focused on this area. If we don't make plans now, we deserve what we get. So that's why the critical nature of what we're doing right now, I think.
And all those properties are problematic for redevelopment because they're very, very deep in the floodplain. They're pre-existing non-conforming uses. The entire first floor on all of them will be inundated in a regular flood, not just a catastrophic flood. They are very, very low, and they need flood insurance. And there's just a lot of so I think we just keep leveraging that angle, and eventually, maybe the solution is transfer development rights, and we give them a really big bonus that they can sell their square footage to somebody that's out of the floodplain, and they could get big money, and that makes them walk away from it. And that was our pipe dream, I guess, that we would solve this issue with transfer of development rights. And that's what we talked about in the local comprehensive plan. And we talked about it last night or the other night at the planning board. And whether or not that all comes true, but some way or other, I think it's the way it should be. How you get there, I don't know.
Well, we could offer a bonus for someone who volunteered to create a road in an area that we think should have one, or a park.
Right. And that's what we, when we talked about this is before the town filled in the floodplain on Spring Bars Road and built the 40 units there, we actually thought we would get the town to do transfer development rights and put those places someplace else and getting incentive to it. But anyways, we got to keep designing, keep working on it, and use every tool in the toolbox to see ways to make it happen. It's not, if it was easy, it would have been done.
So that gives you just a little bit more information also, you two, as to what to
Definitely.
put together for comments, I
Absolutely.
think. Because some of this is just kind of not, it's not within what the scope is that we're really looking at, but it's also peripheral to what we're really looking at, and in some ways should be included in future design.
There is a greenway that runs from Falmouth Harbor to Morris Pond.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is real. It existed before we paved it over and filled it in.
Mhm.
And with sea level rise, it's coming back. So it does need to be something that we take into consideration. And I think our town is so focused on sea level rise, maybe if we talk about that, they might actually see it.
I think you're right, Jim. That's got to be played up. That this is a sensible thing that we're planning for.
You go to the 99 and you look in the backyard, there's a big gully. There's it's almost there.
Mhm.
I walk around town and I can see the old places. You can see where the water ran and we filled it in. It's there.
Mhm.
And that's what we needed to be doing.
So by going backwards, we're going forwards.
We'll take a look at that issue. That'll require a little study on our part to get as familiar with that as you all are. But we'll get up to speed on that and see if there's any recommendations we can make.
Nate, I'm not sure, you think we are all familiar with that. I'm not sure how many people in town really are familiar with that old waterway. I think very few are.
People
Yeah,
know, they know conceptually that there were some, but not necessarily where they are.
Mhm.
Tom or Jed, do you know if Falmouth has acquired the Woods Hole Group maps for future inundation projections? I know they're available by request, so most towns don't have them, but I don't know if there's a chance you may have gotten your hands on those yet.
Yeah, we did a fair amount of work with them with the municipal vulnerability study. And we work with them on a couple of projects. So if we don't have them, I'm sure, given our relationship with them, it wouldn't be too hard to obtain.
Yeah, they're happy to provide them if people request. So we just got them for Wellfleet not too long ago.
And we can follow up with Elise Ludek, who was the person who we talked with most of the time. She was presenting quite a bit during the municipal vulnerability studies.
Okay, great. You want to talk about design? Anything else folks want to cover on the visit or the site visit or anything?
Let's chat design.
I would really like to see our design team start putting forward buildings or things we've got all these the kinds of studies that people want to look at, the types of buildings. We've collected a lot of data. I think it's time to start looking for some concrete examples of, this is what it's going to look like, or maybe it isn't the right time, but that's what I would like to see, because everyone wants to understand it more. So I think it's time to bring some of those forward.
One of the things that we had talked about, Jim, remember, is that we did not want like a city, or you could say like Mashpee Commons, where all the buildings are connected, because that starts to create wind tunnels, particularly when we're talking about increases in height. And we did not want wind tunnels to be able to occur here. We wanted it more people friendly, I think is the way I would put it, so that you have pass-throughs between buildings. That doesn't prevent them from becoming 4 feet tall, but then you have to have a width that looks
I mean, 40, not
artistically
4.
What did I say?
4,
4 stories tall.
4 stories tall, yeah.
Oh, did
You
I say
said
4
4
feet
feet.
tall? Sorry. We have Lilliputians living here. So we didn't want this concept of a city look. I think maybe that's the best way I can put it. More a village look.
We could create incentives for access through buildings for over X or Y width, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
Well, before we sort of get into the substance of it, one of the things that I would love to sort of explore is how we're going to regulate time. So it's a little bit of a puzzle, but it's one that we've worked on quite a bit. And I guess one of the things that you start with, one of the questions that really shapes this argument, it's a question we've already answered, is how much do you want the development to be by right? And the answer has been, if it's good development, the community wants it by right. So if we meet the sort of the vision of this area, we want developers to be able to move through the process pretty smoothly. So what that means from the perspective of the folks who are going to be regulating this is, if things are going to be by rights and the developer is going to get approval if he or she meets the standards, and those standards have to be pretty clear. Right? So that we don't have to tie ourselves in knots, making it super specific, but the language certainly can't be vague and sort of based on design principles. We have to get relatively specific about different things going into this. And when we, in the memorandum that we provided, I'm going to share my screen again. We provided 2 sample graphics here. These are not certainly the end all be all, but these graphics help to illustrate the difference between if you were going to regulate form and if you're going to regulate building design. Those are sort of 2 different things. So this particular graphic, are people seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this particular graphic here is an example of a zoning diagram where you're regulating form, right? So you don't really see all the nitpicky details here. You see sort of the general shell, look at the overall height. You're getting a look at some of the more important features like the entranceways and the awnings and the dormers that are on there. And this really speaks to, this shows, how the buildings relate to one another and the general forms that are going to be acceptable going forward. And this is an area where most communities are very comfortable including this in the zoning language. So it's not part of some sort of design guidelines that's separate from the zoning. This gets adopted, and this goes into it. This is really, when you're talking about form-based code, this is kind of the level of detail that's sort of the foundation of it, these sort of form type diagrams. So this, I would think, is something that, and we can talk about this, but this is usually the kind of diagram that we recommend can go right into the zoning and gives you that kind of specificity that you're looking for in order to have by right development that you're comfortable with. And sort of the next piece, and again, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but this is an example of of going beyond building form and then going into building design. If you're going to be regulating building design, then these particular, I guess they're architectural elevations, sort of like black and white, two-dimensional drawings. These we used in another community to illustrate some really basic pieces of building design. The way different stories are articulated, the roof types that we're trying to promote, the way the dormers sit on the building, the window dimensions, that type of thing. The transparency, as we call it, like the amount of window that's on the ground floor surface in order to make that more inviting piece on that particular level for the pedestrian. So this is an example of how building design can get regulated. And so one of the questions that we want to answer as a group, and I don't think this is one we need to answer definitively tonight, but is this the type of thing that you would want to have in the bylaw? This is part of the adopted bylaw, and so it becomes law, and it becomes, a matter of compliance. Or is this the type of thing that you would want to see as like a non-legal document, as an accompanying design guideline, so it doesn't have the teeth that it would if it were in the bylaw, but it does serve as a valuable resource to everybody saying this is what we're trying to get to. So this is kind of just a big picture question about what you think you might be comfortable with becoming law, and what you think you would be comfortable with being sort of a supporting guidance documents.
I think this is important for all the primary streets. Okay, but I think when we get to secondary and third level streets, we could maybe just have a little bit more of a guidelines, but I think if you're driving down the main boulevards and everything, this is something we might need to control a little bit more to get where we want to get. And it's exactly what I'm thinking, but I don't think everywhere, but give them more flexibility on the backsides or secondary or third streets and let them listen to their ideas. But if you're driving down Davis Straits, or if we put a cross through street in, it's like a primary thing, we need that's what I was thinking anyways, that we would have this kind of level of detail and then drop it off on the secondary and tertiary streets.
I can see the wisdom of both approaches. One, this puts teeth in it if you put it in the bylaws. But it stops any kind of innovation that might be presented to us, because people will just then, so we don't have any trouble, we'll just design to that and it'll look like that. So you start getting a cookie cutter approach to the buildings that are built. I don't know how you connect the two so that you allow some innovation, because it will be easier for the developers if they just copy what we put in the bylaw.
Right.
They don't look like the same two cookies to me.
Jim, they're not. And I'm not saying that those are the cookies we're going to have in here.
I know.
But unless we give maybe 5 or 6 or 7,
Yeah.
and maybe for different heights of buildings, you're asking for an awful lot of representations of buildings that we would find acceptable. And then builders will simply build to that. So then you get away from the charm of Main Street, I think, that was built over many, many, many years, and you see the different styles there.
Yeah, the randomness you need to take into
Correct.
consideration, yeah.
So
I don't know how to solve that problem, but
I don't either. That's the conundrum we have. If we put this in the bylaw and make it easier for developers, then we might not make it as beneficial for the town for what we're trying to accomplish there.
Well, that's why we've hired these high-priced designers.
Right.
to help us with this.
To solve conundrums.
One of the things that we can walk through in detail, as presentations that we've given to other folks is, we often sort of divide design up into three places. There are the things you absolutely have to have in order for this to work, right?
Okay.
So that is the must-have bucket that goes in there. So when we talked about last meeting, we talked about frontage design. And that, as consultants, we always kind of come down hard on that one, saying like you need to have good standards for frontage design, because if you don't make that public realm look spectacular, then you're losing what you're trying to achieve here. So that's an example of what we usually come forward and say, like, that's a must-have. Let's get those frontage design standards in place. And then there's the sort of like, stuff that you're back and forth on. So, for example, what other communities have said, like, let's put this in the bylaw, is they'll give a list of roof forms. So, you see the phrase traditional New England architecture, right? You'll see that in design guidelines. And so what is that, right? So, and people say, well, when you see it, that's fine, but that's not great if you're trying to permit, an application. So we start to break down some of the things that fit into that realm of traditional. So there's different roof types. And so we'll ask our clients, pitched roofs, flat roofs, mansards, like, sort of go through this thing of like, what do you think is appropriate for this area? And we can look at Cape Cod in general and say, well, what have we seen historically, and look at these different building types. So that's an example of, something that folks have been, we'll put the roof types in the bylaw. The idea that you're articulating different stories from one story to the next with materials and trim, that's another thing that helps to break up the massing of buildings. So standards around like architectural techniques that make buildings not look like giant blocks. That's another example. So those are, things that we can walk you through. And then there's the stuff that's a lot of folks think, well, maybe this goes too far, right? So that's examples of looking at like the muntins on windows and the cornices. And, there are places in the United States that have very successfully regulated those types of things. But a lot of communities just feel like, we're not gonna get into, colors and specific building materials and, all these tiny little details that go into architectural design. We're gonna leave that up to the designer to bring something forward. They'll give us that information and then, take a look at it during the permit approval. So it's the must-haves, probably should-haves, and maybe it goes too far. Those sort of three levels of design is one way we try to help people think about that. I imagine, Tony, you thought through this stuff quite a bit.
I like
I just-
what you just articulated, Nate.
And I just want to point out, and I'm no student of architecture, but for some time, I remember a long time ago in my history studies that the mansard roof was developed because in France, they made the tax line below the roof line tax at a much lower level. And so they put the windows in the roof and everyone lowered their taxes. And so it was a design that was driven from a tax law. And that's something that we should take into consideration, because they will build to whatever we tell them to do, where they can find an advantage. But that's a good example. That's an old one, but I believe the mansard roof was developed to avoid real estate taxes.
I think you're right about that story. Nate, it'd be interesting to see if you think that there's a way to get both the things that Pat talked about by creating a series of things that are acceptable, but also creating an out that, if you come up with something creative and everybody loves it, we're going to say yes too. But you're guaranteed with this, and that the other possibility is still out there.
Yeah, it is tough to do from a legal perspective. I'm not saying it's impossible. And this is what special permits were created for, right? Or one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Special permits were created, because as soon as you go down that road, then you've got all the leeway you need
Wheels.
to you know, to have flexibility. But then you've got the public hearing, you've got the appeals, you've got all that other stuff that comes with it that's, you know, can be a headache.
But if we don't make it a special permit vote, but just an option, you can do exactly what it is. And if you show something that's different in facade, but that's also approved by the board, you're still good.
Yeah, we just have to have criteria for what makes it acceptable.
Yep.
Right, so the board's got to hang its hat on something.
And then back to the main issue, which I think is really what your question to me was. I think what matters is that in certain places, we're going to care about what the uses are. If that mansard building is all residential and that first floor is all residential, we have a very different building than if it's mixed use. And so how do we come up with something that creates a set of rules for how we want, where we want that mixed use to occur, and then the places where we're okay if it isn't mixed use? Because it can't be mixed use everywhere.
But I think, Tony, the amount of glass on the first floor would actually drive the use. I don't think anyone would want to live in a total fishbowl of nothing but windows on the grass. And that's gonna make it retail.
They could make that the gym and the amenity area for the building, and we would still hurt all the retailers on that street. And I don't think there's any substitute for being clear about what those choices are. And I would also argue, though, that there's even the assumption that you need big glass to make retail work, but think about, there's lots of different kinds of big glass. There's the big plate glass of a mall, there's window frames, and there's even little tiny windows like Queens Byway, but they're big because there's a lot of little tiny windows, and they still work.
Right, and so
It's
that's why folks use the transparency standard versus, you know, the type of windows. It's the amount of surface you can see through.
But it talked about commercial style windows here. I'm not sure that's what we really want to say.
Well, I think we're getting pretty deep in design. I think we've really covered enough to get our team to start working going forward here. I think this has been a very productive meeting.
Are there things like sidewalk widths and setbacks that you guys are going to propose for, and so on?
Yeah, I mean,
That'll all be part of the frontage discussion.
Yeah, and
Great.
we're caught in a little bit of a pickle with that, but it doesn't mean we can't go forward because of the road redesign.
Yeah.
So if the state level concepts are the ones that are going to go forward, versus a different concept where, you know, things get switched, elements get switched around. That drives a little bit of our thinking there.
Yep.
But we can certainly get started.
And then how are we going to get to the decision on what's in and what's out for land?
Well, I thought we had come to a consensus on that the last meeting, that folks were generally comfortable not including Alma. And we're also generally comfortable not including that little spur in the B2 zone.
For my 2 cents worth, I actually think it matters what happens there, but that, you know, it's not any different than what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, with that little spur, if this is successful, don't you think that the business owners in that little spur would like to mimic what we're achieving?
I guess I wonder why we wouldn't try and help them now.
Right. I know what you're saying, Tony, and I don't see why we wouldn't, but
I don't know
remember
enough
the
about
reason.
the way in which we got to where we are to judge whether that's a good idea or a bad idea.
I don't
And
remember that either.
additionally, I don't know enough about the Main Street North parcel. If you went one more parcel to the west, because it's only one owner, right, between there and Gus Canny?
Yeah, hotel.
That's the
That's a
hotel, I
hotel
think.
already.
Yeah, the hotel's there, and next door to the hotel, that's Gus Canty you're seeing outside the box.
So that's down the property, right on the edge.
The hotel is in and the town property is the edge already?
Yep.
Okay.
But on the south side of Main Street, that's, and I'm worth whatever you guys want to do, but I think that there, the elements we sort of have on south of Main Street North aren't that much different from the Davis Strait parcels to the north.
Right.
Really an issue of scale. I think one of the areas that's, and again, this won't hold us back, but if you can see my cursor, this collection of parcels that are, one row back from Davis Straits back here, to your earlier point, Tony, like we can't expect to have commercial, mixed use commercial on every ground floor. It's not gonna work economically, market wise. And we first looked at this, and I stand by this still. We saw this Worcester Court neighborhood district as the spot where residential would be on the ground floor. This would be a sort of neighborhood district. I think one of the questions as we go forward is if you look at these parcels that are just west of that boundary, not on the street here, one row back, should these parcels be allowed to have residential on the ground floor? And if that's the case, then maybe that line would.
Yeah, I think if you're not on the main drag, you're not going to have certainly much of a market for retail, and not that we think there's that great market for retail going forward. But I think those back spaces, kind of to me evoke that sort of maker spaces where you've got the loft above and the workspace below, whether it's for artisans or maker spaces or whatever that case may be.
I think we have to even be specific, because in the same way that, if that picture of the mansard building that we looked at has a series of offices on the first floor, that's very different than retail.
Right.
Whereas in the back, I don't think we would care.
And I think for going forward purposes, the southeast corner of this diagram right now is a 40B development that I'm selling right now, 28 houses on that. It has huge density, and that little corner, and they're on 4,000 square foot lots, and we're selling them, and they'll all be built within the next year. It's a 40B, and it's approved and permitted and being done. We should probably show that instead of the old subdivision from Helmut Circle that's 20 or 30 years old, because it actually is, the missing middle. You know what I mean? It is a good buffer between the regular zoning and the more commercial, our zoning. If you showed the little lots and all the houses there, it would just help it look a little better. And it's a fact of life. It's being built right now.
And it might help people understand that there's a market for this small lot stuff, and that I can
1,000 square foot
make an argument that Jim's lots are big.
No, I'm sorry, where exactly is this, Jim?
The south, if you understand, it'd be the south there. Somebody had a cursor on it. It would be the southeast corner, right there.
Right.
That's known as Helmut Circle, but we have put a new street in called Kendall Lane, and it goes all the way down to the water. And we're putting 28 houses on it. It's all approved, and I've sold, of the 28, 14 are already committed, 50%, and we haven't even started building yet.
Before we break up, I did want to share one more collection of images with you folks, if that's okay.
Yep, please.
So this is just, I think, helpful for us to talk about and look at different styles of architecture that I think are, you know, maybe along the lines of what we're thinking here, maybe not. So this on the top right, so this is from the perspective of building form. It's interesting to note that these buildings on the top right are really not very different at all from the ones on the bottom right. If you take away the color and the texture and everything else, like the form is very similar. They would be in the same pattern, but the way they're laid out here. Obviously, the finish on these are very different. So this is a bit of an older development, older plaza here with the parking out in front. But you know, smaller window treatments up in this office area on these upper stories here. So nobody's living here in these particular buildings. Whereas these are residences down here on the bottom, sort of, you know, triplex, quadplex type configurations. But I think I was interested in getting reactions just in terms of the different forms and then the different finishes, like what people like, what people don't like, and how does this relate to what we're trying to accomplish, if at all.
I like both of those examples. I like if they can even be combined, which I think they can. That's the kind of diversity in design we would be looking for. I prefer personally that the windows be bigger, at least on the south side, so it can capture the light more.
So when you go over to the top left, that's what you sort of see when you're going over here. These forms are a little bit more they're a little bit different. They're a bit more sophisticated, right? This is a bit more high end than what you're seeing on the right side of the screen. The window sizes and the window treatments aren't very different, but the way they're clustered and the way they're laid out, you know, provides for, you know, really breaks up the surface a lot more. So on the right side here, if you can see my cursor, like there's a lot of sort of flat wall space here, right? Like this doesn't look like a particularly, you know, inviting space. Like you're meant to go there. Like I'm not going to visit this top floor. Whereas you look over here on the left, you know, this really looks like sort of a seamless concept from one floor to the next. Lots of light, you know, you can imagine yourself in that space. But again, when you start looking at building design and you're looking at the corners and the treatments and the articulation on this particular building, you know, you can see where if you get more prescriptive with your design, you know, that could be the difference, right? Like that's the kind of thing that's how that translates. Did I just, on the bottom left over here, you know, I just included this image because this development on the bottom left is in the same development as the bottom right. So there's sort of a residential cluster of buildings, probably about 100 units or so. And then there's a retail plaza that has this grocery store with a little bit more of a contemporary look to it. You know, lots of glass, sort of a different, you know, not a classic traditional roof style.
Right back. I've got to deal with something. Keep going.
Okay, Jim. So this kind of speaks to the idea of variety. These two bottom images being part of the same development. And is that something that when you all look at this, does that make sense to you, or does that not seem like it belongs? And is this type of store, this Whole Foods that you see here, would this be appropriate to our district?
Probably only if it's in the plaza area where there's sufficient space. And it also depends upon how that space is going to be divided in our ultimate plan. But that's the kind of thing I was talking about. You don't want to squash any kind of innovation in design if it makes more sense to the developer.
And now remember, one of the things that Horsley Witten proposed that is for the big plaza areas to offer a special permit option for those
Right.
larger coordinated developments. So as soon as a developer chooses to go down that path, then you really open up your options.
Mhm. And I like that option. How did they meld those two? How big is that development?
This development, which is this up in Shrewsbury? No, this is not Shrewsbury. Where did I take this picture?
That Wayland?
It's not Wayland. Oh, it's Sudbury. Sudbury, thank you. So that's in Sudbury. And so this is part of the old Raytheon property. It's a fairly big development. And to be honest, Pat, the two developments aren't super well integrated. So
Yeah.
so if you were to look at this from the sky, you know, there's a retail plaza, which is, you know, it's a better design than most. You know, the stores are around a central parking area. The parking area is designed with a lot of trees and innovative stormwater management, so it doesn't look as hard as other parking areas. But then you would sort of drive through that parking area. When you get to the back, you enter the residential component of it. So the folks who live here can certainly walk to this grocery store easily, but it's not integrated like mixed use.
Okay, what we're talking about with the much smaller acreage here is going to be something that has to be more integrated.
Yep.
You know, but that could still happen on the junction between zones, so to speak.
Yes. You know, there's something else that I think needs to be brought up here too, is that how is sewage going to be handled in this development? Because you're well aware that Falmouth is much constrained by what we can do.
It's gonna go into a pipe.
Out into the ocean somewhere?
No, we're gonna treat it before you dump it in the ocean, I'm certain. But I don't think that we're considering septic for this area. That's the reason that we like this area, is because it's, you know, it's got sewer service in the area. It's just a matter of developing the capacity in the plant. We're at 25% capacity in the plant at this point. DEP wants to know what's our plan for filling out the last 25%. And as you know, with the Water Quality Committee, they're looking at effluent areas. So this is sewage. This is not septage.
Okay, well, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about that I think ultimately has to be integrated with what we're planning. Because it can't just be pie in the sky.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think we envision that we should check pipe sizes and that sort of thing, but I don't think we ever envisioned having a wastewater capacity issue.
I don't think we ever did either, Nate. But then what we're talking about here, my point being that when Amy and the other people have to start working on how they're going to increase the capacity of our sewage treatment plant, we're going to have to be feeding information in so that this can happen.
We're butting up against our self-imposed time limit of an hour and a half. Not to
So I
say
guess
that
my-
I'm leaving the party. I just want to make sure people are aware of where we're at.
Yep.
Well, my question to these guys is, have you gotten enough tonight to start proceeding, or are there still a few little loose ends that you'd like tied up before we?
I think some things are more clear than others. We definitely have enough to get started. a sizable chunk at that. I think some of this design stuff is going to continue to evolve as we, put things in front of you and you react and, sort of go back and forth like that. But I'm confident we'll get to the right spot. But we definitely have enough to proceed with that.
Okay.
Erica, did you have any questions related to design?
No, I think I'm all set.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Bless you.
That's
Feel like we're in a good spot.
That sneeze was a motion to adjourn.
all righty. Yeah.
We had good guidance.
With a God bless you to boot as well.
Yeah.
So with that, where do we anticipate our next steps at and our next time to get together and take a look and see where we're at?
Question, sharing. Hopefully I'm not sharing my calendar.
And is that something you need to touch base with Jeremy on before we
I definitely want to touch base with Jeremy, although I don't think I'm not sure that he and Erica are going to be contributing a lot to the first go around, because we're going to be doing the bones and the structure. We'll be writing up the parking and the uses and, sort of the nuts and bolts of this first. But I do want to, check in with the two of them on schedule.
absolutely.
Is Thursday, is that what day it is? Is it Thursday today? It is.
Mhm.
October 14th. 1014 was my apartment number when I lived in Dallas. They asked me to leave, and I did. As soon as I could.
Where in Dallas, Tom?
Well, you called me out. It's actually Mesquite.
Oh, that's
Mesquite,
a big town.
Texas. No drinking, no dancing, and a world championship rodeo every Friday night.
That's right.
I did 2 out of 3. I did not rodeo.
Well, I think we're going to be into early November probably, and maybe we'll just touch base with you, Tom, and you can circulate something to the gang here. Does anybody have anything in early November that they know I'm going to be away for a week or vacations or anything like that?
Well, we have a town meeting on November 15th.
Okay.
Most of the planning board's business, well, not most of, quite a bit of the planning board's business is put to bed for town meeting. The rest of it will be done on October 24th. But I think if we want to have some select people come with us, we're probably going to be bumping up against trying to get something in before. Well, we're in the middle of, so let's just be cognizant of the fact that the town meeting is the 15th.
Yeah, the select people, I think, would not have a chance until after town meeting because they get rather tied up in all of that.
Let's make it a sort of overarching goal that we will meet again. I think we can say safely we'll meet before we depart for Turkey Day. We'll have to work our way around town meeting. If that sounds like a reasonable goal, then we'll coordinate directly with you, Tom, to try to set a date.
Yeah, let's sort of pencil in 11/18.
Okay,
It's a Thursday, and I know that Thursday works better for Angie. Hopefully we can, take care of town meeting in, because it's a November town meeting in 3 nights.
Mhm.
And everybody will be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for night number 4 of meetings. I know I will be.
Jeff, do you think that we'll be able to split up on that if we have Chicopee?
Yeah, I've got Chicopee that evening. But yeah, if you want to split, we can split.
Yeah, and I'll check with Jeremy and Joel.
Oh,
'cause,
actually, I'm away. Oops.
oh,
Oh, let's pick a time when you're not away.
That's birthday vacation.
Where are you going?
I'm going to New London, Connecticut to eat pizza for 3 days.
That sounds like hardship.
Is there Frank Pepe's in that list somewhere?
Yes, there is.
Good clam pie, Frank Pepe.
You're not gonna have both kinds though, just Pepe?
Oh, no, I've got like 5 places lined up, so.
Okay.
Yeah, Pizza Betza's down the street there. There's no shortage of reasonable pie places in
It's a
Connecticut.
bit of a mecca, so I'm gonna do it.
So I know that on my calendar, I got the week after Thanksgiving starts to fill up. We have Hanukkah on Monday, the 19th, or Monday, the 29th. If we get pushed back past Thanksgiving. So let's check with our peeps and shoot us something back, and I'll get everything out to the committee members and let them know when what our target date is.
What's our Wednesday nights bad?
What Angie said, she was taking a class on Wednesday night, so
Oh, that's right. So,
6 to 10 weeks. But Wednesday I think is fine with me. I'm always doing my best to try to reserve a spot for people and accommodate as many people as I can.
It's a good night for me as well.
11/17, good night for Pat.
I was thinking the 10th, actually.
The 10th?
But that's before town meeting, right?
Yeah, but well, it's also the day before Veterans Day as well. Not that I'm going anywhere for Veterans Day, or am I a veteran? But
Tom, probably I would suggest that you should check with the select people who are a member of this committee, with Megan and Anjay.
Yep.
And see what their availability is.
so check on 11/10
Sure.
as a prospective date. That
Yeah.
lines up for lots of folks.
I think so. I don't have my calendar in front of me, so I don't know, but as far as I know, I'm fine.
Yes, and I am glamping on the 12th and the 13th. I'm gonna be sleeping
going?
I'm gonna be sleeping in a trailer in Falmouth.
Are you?
Yes. Going glamping. We permitted, everyone hates it, so that's exactly where I should be. Something that we permitted that everyone hates. Right, 11/10 is our projected meeting date. That
Yeah,
one
and
here?
It has to be the following week to accommodate the selectmen. That's okay too.
And 11/18 or 17, it was the next best date, right?
Either-
Nate, you're out that
either
whole
one.
week, right?
I could make one of those work. We have to do the 17th. Probably make that night work.
Oh, that's when you're gone to Connecticut, Nate?
Yeah, but I think the 17th, I could make that work.
Okay.
And how are well, let me look at the calendar. That's how are Tuesdays for people, like on the 16th?
As far as I know, it's fine.
We don't have a planning board meeting that night.
Jeff, are you scheduled for Arlington on the 16th?
I thought Arlington was the 9th. Oh, wait. Actually, number 2. Oh, for Krista, yes, I am.
Let's put that one out there, Tom. Jeff and I are both penciled in on something, but one of us might be able to split that one.
So he's thrown a couple out there. Which one am I penciling? I got 11/10, and which other one?
16 and 17.
11/10 or 11/16 or 17. Okay.
All right.
We'll get back to you like first thing tomorrow if 16's a no for us.
Alrighty. I'm not going to do too much more work tonight. Did I mention I was in Nate's neighborhood at 6:15 this morning? So I'm probably going to take a nap. I might fall asleep during a boring football game and wake up with a lap full of pale ale, but that's occupational hazard.
All right, thanks for a lot of information. That was good.
All right, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank
And
you all
Nate,
very much.
You're still screen sharing, Nate.
Oh, sorry about that.
All right, now I can see everybody's smiling faces. All right, guys. Have a good night. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
Great.
Okay, thank you all.
Good night.